For medieval peasants, winter was both rest and danger. After the autumn harvest, fields went quiet, and the long wait for spring began. From late November to early March, the land froze, rivers turned to glass, and daily life slowed to survival mode. This cold stretch was often called the hungry season. By January, food stores began to shrink, and hunger shadowed many homes. Peasants had no supermarkets or steady markets to depend on. Everything they ate through the winter had to be grown, gathered, or preserved months before. If the harvest was poor, hope rested on rationing and charity. The church calendar guided their days. Feasts like Christmas and Candlemas brought short breaks from hardship. But even celebration was careful. A single goose or loaf shared by many. Work in the fields stopped, but the tasks did not. Families mended tools, spun wool, cut firewood, and prayed that spring would come early. For peasants, winter was not just cold. It was a test of preparation, faith, and endurance. Those who planned well survived. Those who didn't faced hunger, sickness, and loss. Each winter was a reminder that survival itself was a quiet victory. Before the first snow fell, every medieval peasant family turned their focus to one thing: storing enough food to last until spring. There were no shops, no easy refills, and no second chances. What they preserved in autumn decided who survived the winter. Grain was the lifeline. After the harvest, peasants dried and stored barley, rye, and oats in wooden bins or clay-lined pits. These grains became daily bread and porridge, the simplest form of warmth and strength. Root vegetables like turnips, onions, and carrots were buried deep in cool cellars or straw pits to keep them fresh. Apples were wrapped in hay and hung in lofts. Every bit of nature's gift had to be guarded carefully. Meat was a rare treasure. Families salted pork or smoked small cuts of bacon over the hearth, letting the scent fill the cottage for weeks. Fish from nearby rivers were dried or pickled in barrels. Nothing went to waste. Even animal fat became cooking grease or candle wax. Food was rationed by the day: a loaf of coarse bread, a pot of pottage, and maybe a slice of salted meat had to feed the whole family. Every crumb mattered. Winter meals were simple, but full of care. Peasants shared what they had with neighbors, especially the elderly and sick. A single pot of soup could warm many hearts. In those harsh months, food meant more than survival. It was comfort, community, and hope. When the last snow began to melt, every bite saved and every jar sealed was proof of their wisdom and will to endure. For medieval peasants, a full cellar was not luxury, it was life itself. Household hearths and heating techniques in a medieval peasant's home, warmth was both precious and fragile. The heart of every cottage was the hearth, a simple open fire built on a stone base, often right in the center of the single-room dwelling. It was their kitchen, their heater, and their light through the dark winter nights. Without it, life in the cold months would have been unbearable. Wood was the main fuel, though not always easy to find. Peasants gathered fallen branches, dried peat, or even animal dung when firewood ran short. Every spark was carefully guarded. Fires were rarely allowed to die, because restarting one in freezing weather was a serious challenge. Many families covered the embers each night with ashes, keeping them alive till morning. The hearth's warmth spread unevenly, so families slept as close to it as possible. Straw mattresses were pulled near the fire, and everyone, parents, children, even pets, huddled together under wool blankets for shared body heat. Some used bed warmers, small metal pans filled with glowing coals, to heat sheets before sleeping. Others warmed bricks or stones by the fire, then wrapped them in cloth to place at their feet. Most cottages had no chimney. Smoke curled upward and filled the room before escaping through small roof holes or gaps in the thatch. Though unpleasant, that smoky haze actually helped trap heat, keeping the home a few degrees warmer, a small blessing in biting cold. Despite the soot, the coughing, and the flickering shadows, that humble fire symbolized life. Around it, peasants cooked, mended, prayed, and shared stories until dawn. In a world of frost and hardship, the hearth was more than warmth. It was the glowing heart of survival. Clothing, layering, and materials. In the harsh winters of medieval Europe, clothing was a peasant's first defense against the cold. There were no heated homes or thick duvets, only layers of fabric, carefully chosen and lovingly mended, stood between a person and the biting wind. The first layer was usually linen. It was light, soft, and worn close to the skin to absorb sweat and keep the body dry. Though linen didn't offer much warmth, it provided comfort beneath rougher fabrics. Over this came wool, the true hero of winter. Wool was warm even when damp, and every village spun and wove it by hand. Peasants wore thick wool tunics, cloaks, and hose that could last for years if cared for properly. For extra warmth, many lined their clothing with fur. Wealthy nobles wore fox or marten, but peasants made do with what they had: rabbit, lamb, or even sheepskin. These natural linings added precious insulation during freezing nights. In some regions, people even stuffed straw or dried grass between layers for added warmth. Accessories were essential: woolen scarves wrapped around necks, hoods pulled low over heads, and thick mittens protected fingers from frostbite. At night, peasants slept fully dressed, often adding a simple nightcap or hood to keep in every bit of heat. Each garment was handmade, patched, and repaired countless times. Mothers taught daughters to spin and weave, turning sheep's wool into survival itself. Clothing was not fashion, it was armor against the season. In the dead of winter, a peasant's layers were their shelter. Every thread carried the warmth of hard work and care. Wrapped in wool and hope, they faced the cold, knowing that even the simplest stitch could mean the difference between comfort and suffering. Shelter, draft-proofing, and cottage. Design a medieval peasant's home was small, simple, and built for survival. It might look rough by modern standards, but every detail, from the walls to the roof, was shaped by centuries of experience in battling the cold. These cottages were not just houses, they were handmade shields against winter's bite. Most were built from a wattle and daub, a woven frame of sticks packed with a mixture of clay, straw, and animal dung. When dry, it formed thick walls that trapped warmth surprisingly well. In colder regions, stone or timber was used instead, holding heat from the hearth long after the fire died down. The walls were often coated with lime plaster to seal cracks and keep drafts away. The roofs were thatched with layers of straw or reeds. Though simple, thatch worked like natural insulation, keeping snow out and warmth in. Many peasants also stuffed gaps with moss or mud to block icy winds. Windows, if they existed at all, were small openings covered with oiled cloth or wooden shutters, never glass. Closing them tight at night made a huge difference in temperature. Floors were usually packed earth, sometimes covered with rushes or straw to add softness and reduce dampness. Some families built raised sleeping platforms or lofts under the roof, where heat from the hearth gathered. The higher you slept, the warmer you stayed. Every home was built around warmth and simplicity. There was no luxury, only clever use of what nature offered. A few inches of thatch, a sealed wall, a floor of straw. These humble materials kept families alive through endless nights of frost. In those dim, smoky cottages, peasants found warmth not from comfort, but from ingenuity and the closeness of home. Livestock shared heat and farm, layout in the frozen silence of medieval winters. Warmth often came from the most unexpected source, animals. Peasants knew that every living creature gave off heat, and they used that simple truth to survive. Their animals were not just workers or food sources, they were part of the household's defense against the cold. Most peasant cottages were built beside or directly connected to a byre, a small barn or stable. In many homes, only a thin wooden wall or half partition separated the family's living space from their animals. At night, the cattle, goats, pigs, and even chickens were brought indoors. Their breath and body heat filled the air, raising the temperature inside by several degrees. It might have smelled strong, but that warmth often meant the difference between comfort and frostbite. This close arrangement also protected animals from freezing or being stolen by wolves and thieves. Cows provided steady warmth through the night, while pigs, known for their body heat, often slept closest to the wall shared with the family area. Chickens perched on beams or huddled in corners, their feathers adding quiet life to the dim room. The farm layout reflected this bond between humans and animals. Barns, sheds, and living quarters stood tightly clustered to block the wind and shorten the distance between shelter and food storage. Everything was compact, practical, and protective. Living so close to livestock was not glamorous, but it was wise. The shared warmth, the steady breathing, and the soft animal sounds brought a strange comfort through the darkest months. In those long, icy nights, peasants and animals survived together, not as separate worlds, but as one living circle of heat, hope, and endurance. Work, income, and winter tasks. When snow covered the fields and the soil froze solid, medieval peasants faced a quiet but busy season. The rhythm of life changed completely. Plowing, sowing, and harvesting were impossible, so families turned indoors, finding new ways to stay useful, earn a little income, and keep the household running through the long winter months. Men often took to the forests to gather and cut firewood. Woodcutting was hard, cold work, but it kept the hearth burning, the center of warmth and survival. They also repaired tools, sharpened blades, and fixed fences or carts damaged during the farming season. Some men found extra work crafting barrels, carving handles, or making simple furniture to trade in nearby villages once spring arrived. Inside the cottage, women's hands were never idle. They spun wool from the year's shearing, wove cloth on simple looms, and mended clothing worn thin by labor. These were not just chores, they were survival trades. Extra yarn, woven cloth, or knitted garments could be sold or bartered for grain, salt, or candles. Children helped too, twisting rope, feeding animals, or gathering dry twigs for kindling. Work patterns shifted with the cold. Peasants rose later, saving daylight and conserving energy. Tasks were arranged around the fire's warmth. Evenings were spent together, spinning, carving, and storytelling. By the dim firelight, it was a time to mend not only tools and clothes, but spirits as well. Though winter seemed still, life continued in quiet motion. Every stitch, every log, every spark mattered. Through patience and persistence, peasants turned the harshest season into one of preparation and endurance. Their humble work kept homes warm, bellies filled, and hope alive until the first thaw of spring. Community mutual aid and social practices in medieval villages, no one truly faced winter alone. Survival depended not only on one's own labor, but also on the strength of the community. When snow covered the fields and hunger lingered at the door, neighbors became lifelines. Helping one another was not charity, it was the unwritten rule of survival. Villagers shared what little they had. A family with extra grain might trade it for firewood. Someone with a healthy cow would share milk with those in need. When a roof leaked or a barn collapsed under snow, neighbors gathered to repair it together. These small acts of cooperation created bonds stronger than stone walls. Communal ovens were a blessing during winter. Instead of each home wasting fuel, villagers brought their dough to a shared bakehouse. There, the heat of one great fire baked bread for many families, filling the air with warmth and the scent of life itself. Hearths and food were shared with travelers, widows, and the elderly. No one was left to freeze if others could help. The church also played a vital role. Monasteries and parish priests distributed alms, soup, and bread to the poor. During harsh winters or famine years, churches became places of refuge. People prayed together for mercy and gave thanks for small blessings. A mild day, a healed child, or a kind neighbor's gift. Winter forged a quiet unity. In the glow of shared fires and humble meals, peasants learned that survival was not only about warmth or food, but about compassion. Every shared loaf, every repaired roof, every prayer whispered in the cold built a web of care that carried entire villages through the darkest months. In helping one another, they found the true warmth of humanity. Health, diet, and coping with sickness winter was the hardest test for a medieval peasant's body. Cold winds, poor diet, and crowded homes made sickness a constant threat. Without doctors or medicine as we know them today, people relied on food, faith, and old wisdom to keep themselves alive. Their diet was plain but filling. The daily meal was usually pottage, a thick stew made of grains, beans, and whatever vegetables had been stored from autumn. Salted meat or fish appeared rarely, mostly on feast days. Bread, coarse and dark, was eaten with everything. When supplies ran low, families watered down stews or mixed old flour with ground acorns or peas to make it stretch further. These humble meals gave strength, but not much variety, so malnutrition and fatigue were common. Health was understood through the humors, the ancient belief that the body's balance of hot, cold, wet, and dry determined well-being. In winter, people feared an excess of cold in the body, so they ate warm foods, drank spiced ale, and stayed near the hearth. Bathing was rare. People believed washing too often could let in illness through the skin. Instead, they wiped with cloths and changed undergarments when possible. When sickness struck, peasants turned to folk remedies, garlic, honey, and herbs like sage or thyme were prized for healing. Warm wine, vinegar compresses, or animal fat mixed with herbs were used to treat pain and infection. For serious illness, they prayed, lit candles, and hoped for mercy. Disease spread easily in the smoky, crowded cottages, especially in harsh winters when windows stayed shut. Yet through hardship and homemade cures, peasants endured. Their resilience was born of necessity, a stubborn will to survive, even when warmth, food, and health were slipping away. Crisis responses, famine, migration, and disaster. Prep when winter stores failed. Medieval peasants faced the darkest edge of survivals, a poor harvest, disease among livestock, or an early frost could turn an already harsh season into a fight for life. Hunger spread quickly, and desperation followed close behind. The first step was rationing. Families stretched every crumb, thinning pottage, baking smaller loaves, and boiling roots again for flavor. When the stores finally emptied, they turned to neighbors or local lords for help. Some villages kept small communal reserves of grain or dried peas for the poorest. Others relied on the church, where monks distributed bread and broth to the hungry. But when famine struck across regions, charity could not feed everyone. Many peasants resorted to selling what little they owned, tools, animals, even clothing, just to buy food. Some became beggars, traveling from village to village in search of mercy. Entire families left their homes, joining streams of migrants moving toward towns or monasteries in hope of work or shelter. Seasonal laborers walked miles to cut wood, dig ditches, or serve in wealthier households for food instead of coin. Disaster left deep scars. Weakened by hunger, people fell to sickness more easily, and villages sometimes emptied entirely. Children were sent to live with relatives. Elders often gave their food to the young. The death of even a few harvests could reduce a whole generation. Over time, communities learned from these tragedies. They built better grain stores, planned shared reserves, and developed networks of trade and aid between villages. Yet, the memory of famine never faded. Every full barn and sealed barrel became a symbol of security. For peasants, the lesson was carved into the rhythm of their lives. Prepare, share, endure, because winter could always come again.